Dr. Maya Johnson sat at her cluttered desk, the soft light of the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, casting a warm glow on her papers. Her heart raced with anticipation as she meticulously reviewed her research on systemic racism within educational institutions. This conference was not just an opportunity. It was a chance to elevate the voices that had been silenced for too long. She adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the computer screen, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she made final edits. "Just a few more tweaks, and it'll be ready," she murmured to herself, determination lacing her voice. The weight of her work was not lost on her. It represented countless hours of interviews, data analysis, and the painful stories of students who had faced discrimination. Maya had poured her heart into every page, believing that her findings could spark crucial conversations about race and equity in academia. Her phone buzzed, drawing her attention away from the screen. It was a message from her mentor, Dr. Emily White. Asterisk, excited to see you at the conference. Remember to breathe and trust your work. Asterisk, Maya smiled at the encouragement, her spirits lifting slightly. She typed a quick reply, her fingers flying over the keys. Asterisk, thanks, Emily. I can't wait to share my findings. Asterisk, later that evening, she stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the collar of her blazer. The fabric felt crisp against her skin, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling in her mind. She practiced her speech, envisioning the audience's faces as she spoke passionately about her research. "Injustice thrives in silence," she rehearsed, her voice rising with conviction. "We must confront these issues head-on if we are ever to see true change." The day of the conference selection meeting arrived with an air of excitement and trepidation. Maya entered the conference room, her heart pounding as she took a seat at the long table filled with esteemed faculty members. She glanced around, noting the credentials and accolades that adorned each professor's nameplate. Among them were a few who had openly dismissed her work in the past, their skeptical gazes already assessing her presence. "Let's get started," declared Dr. Thompson, the head of the selection committee, his voice booming and authoritative. "We have a lot of proposals to review today." Maya's stomach knotted as she prepared to present her research, her palms clammy with nervous energy. As the meeting progressed, her turn finally arrived. "Dr. Johnson, please share your findings," Dr. Thompson said, gesturing for her to begin. She stood, her hands steadying on the table as she launched into her presentation. "My research highlights the pervasive impact of systemic racism in our educational systems, focusing on the experiences of marginalized students," she began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the topic. But as she spoke, she noticed the dismissive glances exchanged between a couple of senior faculty members. Dr. Jenkins, a renowned scholar known for his conservative views, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "But how can you be sure your findings are valid?" he interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're framing this issue without considering the broader context." Maya's heart sank. "With all due respect, Dr. Jenkins, the context is precisely what I am addressing. It's crucial to examine how institutional policies perpetuate inequality," she replied, her voice firm but respectful. "Perhaps we should focus on more pressing issues," chimed in Dr. Reynolds, another faculty member, her tone dismissive. "This sounds like an agenda rather than a research proposal." Maya's resolve faltered as the committee continued to dismiss her work, their biases laid bare. She felt the weight of their assumptions about her identity crushing her spirit. But as the meeting concluded and she walked out of the room, heartbroken yet fueled by a fire within, she knew this wasn't the end. "No one can silence me," she whispered to herself, a vow forming in her heart. Maya would not allow their prejudice to define her journey. She would rise above, determined to prove them wrong and elevate the conversation around race and academia. As she stepped into the hallway, a sense of purpose enveloped her, igniting a spark that would drive her forward in the days to come. Maya settled herself in her small office, the walls lined with books that spoke of struggle, resilience, and the complex tapestry of race in academia. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the papers strewn across her desk. She had spent countless hours poring over her research, but today felt different. Today, She was ready to amplify the voices of those who had long been silenced. With her laptop open, she took a deep breath and began making calls. Her first interview was with Sarah, a bright student from the sociology department who had shared her experiences of feeling marginalized during her time at the university. As Maya dialed the number, she felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Would Sarah be willing to share her story? When the line connected, Sarah's upbeat voice broke through the tension. "Hey, Dr. Johnson, I'm so glad you called." "Hi, Sarah. Thank you for agreeing to talk with me today. I really appreciate it," Maya replied, her tone warm and inviting. "I want to hear about your experiences here at the university, specifically any challenges you've faced as a student of color." Sarah hesitated for a moment, the weight of her experiences evident even over the phone. "Well, there have definitely been some moments where I felt, invisible. Like my opinions didn't matter in class discussions, especially in the larger lectures." Maya listened intently, taking notes as she spoke. "Can you tell me more about a specific instance?" "Sure," Sarah began, her voice steadying. "In one of my classes, we were discussing race and representation in media. I raised my hand to share my perspective, and the professor just glossed over my point, moving on to a white student who had raised their hand right after me. It felt like my voice didn't carry the same weight." Maya's heart sank at the familiar narrative. She had experienced similar dismissals herself, and knew too well the impact they had on students like Sarah. "That's incredibly frustrating, and it's important that we bring these issues to light. Your experience matters," Maya encouraged. As the conversation unfolded, Maya gathered more testimonials, each story adding layers to her research. She spoke with students from different backgrounds, each sharing their unique struggles and triumphs within the academic sphere. These conversations fueled her determination, solidifying her resolve to expose the systemic inequities present in her university. Yet, as she prepared to share her findings with her colleagues, doubt crept in. During a faculty meeting, Maya felt the weight of skepticism hanging in the air as she presented her data. The room was filled with familiar faces, some supportive but many skeptical. She could sense the undercurrents of resistance, particularly from those who had dismissed her work before. "Dr. Johnson, while your intentions are commendable, I think we must be cautious about making sweeping generalizations," a senior colleague, Dr. Thompson, stated, crossing his arms defensively. "We need to ensure our conclusions are backed by rigorous evidence." Maya took a moment to collect herself, feeling the sting of his words. "I understand your concern, Dr. Thompson. However, the testimonials I've gathered illustrate a pattern that cannot be ignored. It's a reflection of lived experiences that many students face daily. Lived experiences are not enough to form a basis for academic discourse," he replied, his tone dismissive. "We need data that meets our institutional standards." Maya's frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "With all due respect, Dr. Thompson, these students are our data. Their stories highlight a critical aspect of our academic environment that we must address." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Maya's heart raced as she realized that her peers were not ready to confront the uncomfortable truths she was presenting. Days later, while anxiously checking her email, she received a notification that her paper had been submitted to an international journal for review. A flicker of hope ignited within her. This was a step toward validation, a chance to have her work recognized beyond the walls of her university. As she sat back in her chair, Maya felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Would her research resonate with others? Would it provoke the necessary conversations? The weight of her journey pressed down on her, but she was determined to see it through. She whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Maya sat in the faculty meeting, her heart pounding as the sterile conference room buzzed with idle chatter and the rustling of papers. The air was thick with tension, a palpable undercurrent that made her skin crawl. She had been invited to present her findings on systemic racism in academia, but the glares exchanged among her colleagues told her that not everyone was pleased. As the meeting progressed, she leaned in, straining to catch snippets of conversation drifting from the far end of the table. "I just don't see how her work is relevant." One of the senior professors, Dr. Marshall, scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's just another attempt to push a narrative that doesn't hold water. We cannot let her undermine our reputation with this agenda. Maya's stomach twisted. She felt the sting of his words like a slap, each syllable a reminder of the uphill battle she faced. She glanced at Dr. Emily White, her mentor, who sat 2 seats away, her brow furrowed in concern. Maya desperately wished for a supportive word, a show of solidarity. But as the meeting continued, it became clear that Dr. White was equally powerless in this moment. As the discussion shifted to other topics, Maya felt a wave of frustration wash over her. How could they dismiss her work without even reading it? Was it really just about her identity? Her resolve hardened. She knew she had to confront this head-on and prove her worth. But the thought of facing this hostility alone was daunting. After the meeting, Maya found herself wandering through the dimly lit hallways of the faculty building, lost in thought. The weight of her colleagues' dismissiveness pressed heavily on her shoulders. She needed to talk to someone who understood. As if on cue, she spotted Dr. White heading towards her office. Maya quickened her pace to catch up. "Emily," she called out, her voice laced with urgency. Dr. White turned, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she took in Maya's distressed demeanor. "Maya, what's wrong?" she asked, her tone softening. They're trying to undermine me, Emily. At the meeting, I heard them talking about my research, dismissing it without even reading it. It feels like they're just waiting for me to fail," Maya confessed, her voice trembling. Dr. White's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger crossing her features. "Maya, you cannot let them get to you. Their ignorance is not a reflection of your brilliance. You have a powerful voice and an important message. You must keep pushing forward. I will support you, no matter what." Maya felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Dr. White had always been her guiding light, the one who believed in her potential when others did not. "Thank you, Emily. I don't want them to win," she replied, her determination rekindled. "Then don't let them," Dr. White urged, placing a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder. "You're on the path to something great. Keep fighting for your truth." With renewed vigor, Maya returned to her office, her mind racing. She sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and research notes. As she scrolled through her emails, her heart skipped when she noticed a notification from the International Journal where her paper was submitted. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. Maya gasped, her breath catching in her throat. "Accepted for publication," the email proclaimed in bold letters. A wave of elation washed over her, filling the void that the faculty meeting had created. She could hardly contain her excitement. This was validation, proof that her work mattered. "Emily," she shouted, bursting out of her office and rushing down the hall. Dr. White looked up from her desk, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I got it. My paper was accepted," Maya exclaimed, the joy radiating from her. Dr. White stood up, her face breaking into a proud smile. "Oh, Maya, that's wonderful. I knew it would be. This is just the beginning for you. I can't believe it. After everything they said, this feels like a victory," Maya said, her voice still bubbling with enthusiasm. "It is a victory, and it's time to make sure your voice is heard loud and clear," Dr. White replied, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. Maya nodded, the weight of the world lifting as she realized that this was her moment to shine. With her mentor by her side, she was ready to face any challenges ahead, fueled by the knowledge that her truth was worth fighting for. As Dr. Maya Johnson's research began to gain traction, her inbox flooded with invitations to speak at various academic events across the country. Each email was a reminder of the journey she had undertaken, the hurdles she had faced, and the resilience she had cultivated. One rainy afternoon, as she sat in her cozy office cluttered with books and papers, the soft chime of her laptop signaled another opportunity. This time, it was an invitation to keynote a conference at a renowned university, an institution that had once snubbed her proposal. Maya leaned back in her chair, a smile creeping onto her face. "This is it," she murmured to herself, her heart racing with excitement. Just then, her mentor, Dr. Emily White, knocked softly before entering the room. "I heard the good news," Emily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You're becoming quite the sought-after speaker." "Thanks, Emily," Maya replied, her voice warm with gratitude. "It feels surreal. Just a few months ago, I was fighting tooth and nail to be heard. Now, they want to hear me." Emily placed a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder. "You deserve every bit of this recognition. Your work is vital, and it's resonating with many. Just remember, though, with this newfound attention, there will be those who will try to undermine you." Maya nodded, acutely aware of the faculty members who had dismissed her research. They were not just colleagues. They were the ones who held the power to shape narratives in academia. As she prepared for her upcoming talks, Maya felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. During one of her presentations at a local university, she noticed a few familiar faces in the crowd. Faculty members from her own institution. They sat in the back, arms crossed, their expressions unreadable. She could almost feel the tension radiating from them, an undercurrent of disdain. After her talk, which was met with enthusiastic applause, Maya stepped off the stage, her heart still pounding. But as she mingled with the audience, she overheard snippets of conversation from her detractors. "Did you hear the way she twisted the data?" One of them sneered. "It's all sensationalism, trying to make a name for herself." Maya's heart sank. The very people who had initially dismissed her were now attempting to discredit her publicly. It stung, but she refused to let it deter her. Instead, she drew strength from the positive feedback she received from attendees who were genuinely moved by her research. Back at her university, the atmosphere felt charged. Whispers filled the hallways as her colleagues discussed her rising profile. During a faculty meeting, she couldn't ignore the undercurrents of jealousy and resentment. "I can't believe she's getting so much attention for her findings," one professor said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "It's like they've forgotten who the real experts are." Maya clenched her jaw, her resolve hardening. She had fought too hard to let their narrow-mindedness dictate her narrative. As she prepared for an upcoming panel discussion, she rehearsed her points meticulously, ready to confront the biases head-on. On the day of the panel, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Maya took a deep breath, glancing at the lineup of esteemed colleagues seated beside her. She could sense the tension in the air as the moderator introduced her. "Maya, your work has generated quite a stir. Some have praised it, while others have raised questions about its validity. How do you respond to the criticisms?" Maya straightened in her chair, her voice steady. "I welcome criticism, as it is essential for growth and understanding. However, I believe it is crucial to distinguish between constructive feedback and attempts to undermine the legitimacy of my research based on personal biases." A murmur rippled through the audience. She could see some of her detractors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Let's be clear," Maya continued, her passion igniting. "Systemic racism exists not just in the students' experiences, but also within our institutions. Ignoring it does not make it go away. If we are to create a truly inclusive academic environment, we must be willing to confront uncomfortable truths, even if it challenges the status quo." The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air. Maya could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of the truths she was laying bare. It was a confrontation, not just with her colleagues, but with the very structures that upheld their biases. As she spoke, she noticed a flicker of recognition in some of the audience members' eyes. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were beginning to see the importance of her work, the necessity of the dialogue she was fostering. But deep down, Maya knew the battle was far from over. She would have to remain vigilant, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But for now, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Maya Johnson stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room, adjusting her blazer for the umpteenth time. The fabric felt heavier than usual, perhaps a reflection of the weight of the moment ahead of her. She could hardly believe it. Her research had won the prestigious International Academic Excellence Award, catapulting her into the spotlight she had long yearned for, but had previously been denied. The conference she had once been excluded from had now invited her to present her findings. This was the moment she had envisioned during those long nights spent poring over data and testimonials, fighting a system that had tried to silence her. As she prepared, her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Emily White, her mentor. "Remember, Maya, you've earned this. Speak your truth." "We are all behind you," it read. Maya smiled, drawing strength from Emily's unwavering support. She took a deep breath, pulling her shoulders back, reminding herself that she was more than just a statistic in an oppressive system. She was a beacon of hope for so many. Upon arriving at the conference hall, a buzz of excitement filled the air. Colleagues and attendees alike were bustling about, discussing the groundbreaking work being presented. Maya spotted a few familiar faces from the faculty who had once dismissed her. She felt a surge of adrenaline as she caught their eye. They were whispering among themselves, their expressions a mix of intrigue and discomfort. "Look who it is," one of them, Dr. Campbell, muttered sarcastically, though loud enough for Maya to hear. "I can't believe they let her in here." Maya chose to ignore him, focusing instead on the energy of the room. As she walked towards the stage, she felt the weight of her research behind her, a testament to the struggles faced by students of color in academia. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every voice that had been stifled. Minutes later, she stood at the podium, her heart racing as she looked out at the sea of faces. "Thank you for being here today," she began, her voice steady. "Today, I want to share the stories that have shaped my research and reveal the systemic issues that continue to plague our institutions." As she spoke, the audience leaned in, captivated by the clarity and passion in her voice. She shared the powerful testimonials she had gathered, weaving a narrative that highlighted the struggles and triumphs of students who had faced discrimination and exclusion. The room was silent, save for the sound of her voice echoing off the walls. But just as she was gaining momentum, she noticed a group of her colleagues whispering in hushed tones at the back of the hall. A flicker of unease crossed her mind, but she pushed it aside. This was her moment. After her presentation, however, the unease returned with a vengeance. As she mingled with attendees, she overheard snippets of conversation that made her blood run cold. "We need to find a way to discredit her," one voice said. "This recognition can't stand. It threatens everything we've built." Maya's heart raced as she pieced together the implications of their words. They were plotting against her, scheming to sabotage her success, even now, in the very moment she had worked so hard to achieve. She felt a mix of anger and determination surge within her. "Excuse me, are you talking about me?" she asked, her voice cutting through their conversation. The three faculty members turned to her, their expressions shifting from surprise to defensive. "Maya, we were just discussing the implications of your work," Dr. Campbell replied, his tone condescending. "Implications? Or how to discredit it?" Maya shot back, her voice unwavering. "This isn't just about me. It's about the truth. It's about all the students who have suffered because of systemic biases." The tension in the air thickened as a small crowd began to gather, drawn in by the confrontation. She could see the unease on her colleagues' faces, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Maya, let's not make a scene," another colleague said, trying to diffuse the situation. "No," Maya replied firmly, "it's time for the truth to come out. If you're trying to undermine my work, you're not just attacking me. You're attacking the voices of every student who has been marginalized." With her heart pounding, Maya stood her ground, ready to fight not just for herself, but for a change that was long overdue. The conference had become a battleground, and she was determined to emerge victorious. Dr. Maya Johnson stood at the podium, her heart racing as she faced an audience filled with both supporters and skeptics. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation, a stark contrast to the dismissive whispers she had endured months earlier. This was her moment, a culmination of her relentless pursuit of truth and justice. With a deep breath, she glanced at the slides behind her, her meticulously gathered data illuminating the systemic issues within academia. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Today, I present evidence not just of racial bias in our institutions, but of deliberate misconduct by those who are meant to uphold the integrity of academia." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Maya could see a few of her former detractors shift uncomfortably in their seats. As she clicked through her presentation, Maya detailed her findings. Data collected from her interviews with students of color, testimonials that painted a vivid picture of the discrimination and silencing that had pervaded their academic experiences. These students are not just statistics. They are voices that have been marginalized, and their stories need to be heard, she asserted, her passion igniting the room. The atmosphere shifted as she unveiled documents that revealed her colleagues' attempts to manipulate data and suppress dissenting opinions. These emails, she said, pointing to the screen, show a clear intent to undermine not just my work, but the very foundation of academic integrity. We must ask ourselves, what kind of institution are we if we allow this behavior to continue? A murmur of disbelief rippled through the audience, but Maya pressed on, her determination unwavering. This is not just about me. It's about the countless scholars of color who have been silenced, who have been told their work is not worthy of recognition. It's time for accountability. From the back of the room, Dr. Emily White, Maya's mentor, nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with pride. Maya could sense the energy shifting as more audience members began to lean forward, engaged and receptive. Together, we can create an academic environment that values diversity and inclusion, where all voices are amplified rather than silenced, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. But it requires us to acknowledge the uncomfortable truths about our colleagues and our institutions. The tension in the room was palpable, and as she concluded her presentation, a wave of applause erupted. Maya felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the validation and support from her peers. This was not just a personal victory, it was a collective awakening. In the aftermath of her presentation, the university administration quickly took action. Maya had anticipated resistance, but instead, she witnessed a swift response to the evidence she had presented. Faculty members implicated in the misconduct faced investigations, and a committee was formed to address the systemic issues Maya had so passionately highlighted. Later that evening, she was approached by the university's president, a stern yet supportive figure. Dr. Johnson, your work has sparked a necessary dialogue within our institution, he said, his voice steady. We need someone with your vision and courage to lead our diversity and inclusion initiatives. We want to offer you a prominent leadership position. Maya was taken aback, her heart racing once more. This was not just a recognition of her work, it was an opportunity to enact real change. I accept, she replied, her voice firm, but only if I can ensure that the voices of marginalized students remain at the forefront of our efforts. As the president nodded in agreement, Maya realized that her journey had transformed her pain into power. She was no longer just a scholar fighting for recognition. She had become a leader poised to reshape the academic landscape for future generations. The tears she had held back earlier now flowed freely, a mix of relief and hope washing over her. This was her legacy, one of resilience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice. And as she stepped away from the podium, she knew that this was only the beginning.